Hello and welcome to KelownaNow Live. I'm Jason Mann with Jim Check and our guest, Renee Merrifield. We're broadcasting live on YouTube and X, and we're bringing you these conversations with people that shape our community and our world and our future. And today we're just honored to have Renee with us, our esteemed member of the Legislative Assembly, representing Kelowna Mission since 2020 and primarily involved with the environment portfolio, innovation technology, and
Citizen Services.
Citizen Services. So we're just grateful to have you, and I know you've been busy, been off at the now I'm forgetting what it's called.
The Ledge.
The Ledge. But were you at the downtown?
Oh yeah, the Field of Crosses.
Field of Crosses.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So making some appearances today and taking some time to stop in and chat with us. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Well, let's kick it off with the biggest, hottest topic out there right now, carbon tax.
Oh, it is a big topic.
I see that our Prime Minister gave a break to Atlantic Canada.
Yes.
And then David Eby had a quote out there saying that he stabbed us in the back. And so is he going to do anything here in British Columbia?
No. No, he's made that very clear this last week, and if he did do anything now, it would be very disingenuous. Having said that, we are in session right now, so we've had an opportunity all week to ask him why not, and to give examples. And, you know, at first we brought up the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, who really on Sunday night came out with one of the best videos that I've ever seen.
Like a firestorm.
It was like, it was unreal. It was unreal. And even those that, you know, left or right, doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum, you know, it was being sent around and going viral just on like, wow, what premier does an interview basically in his kitchen with his like hoodie on, and to stand up for his residents and to stand up for those that he has been elected by. So I thought it was brilliant. We brought that one up as an example, but then no sooner have we done it and got lambasted by the NDP saying, oh, that's because they're right wing and the yada yada yada, that Manitoba's brand new Indigenous NDP leader stands up for Manitobians and basically does the same.
And then Danielle Smith also
yeah.
followed
Oh
suit,
yeah.
right? So
yeah, absolutely.
we expected that from Danielle for sure.
Absolutely.
Carbon tax seems like, I mean, I've been saying it for a long time. It's like beating people over the head with a stick, right? And and I get what they're trying to do. They're saying that carbon tax will force people into other alternatives. But we see in other parts of the world, EV adoption, which we're going to talk about in a bit here, EV adoption in China is 38% on new vehicles. In the US, it's 10%. We're at 5% in Canada. And they have no carbon tax. So how are they getting there without beating people over the head with a stick?
Yeah, I think each country is trying to use different methodologies, and carbon pricing has been used and was brought in actually by the BC Liberals, now United, back in 2008, 2009 as a user pay, so that you only paid for what you used, and as a disincentive, just as you stated. It was also supposed to be revenue neutral, so people would receive tax breaks, and they didn't really feel a difference in what the carbon tax costed to what it was. That was back when it was $5 a cubic ton. Now it is at $65 and going up every single year. April 1st, we'll see another escalation to the $80 a cubic ton, which is just there is no shortage of appetite for governments to keep escalating it because it's morphed into general revenue. So whether it's the federal program or whether it's the BC program, it all goes into generalized revenues, and we see very little of it back.
So Kevin Falcon took a stand and said he would axe the tax.
He did. Last week he came out with our plan, and basically our plan of what Premier Eby could do today. So there are 4 things that are fully within his purview because we are not under a federal tax. So he could eliminate all taxes on heating fuels. That includes natural gas. Eby could do that tomorrow if he chose to do it. It doesn't require anything to be done by the federal government. So we are advocating for that. We're advocating for an elimination of provincial fuel tax. That again, something that EV could do tomorrow, totally within his purview, and that's 15 cents a liter, and has a huge affect, especially in rural and remote communities and those that don't have an electric vehicle option. And then we also talked about giving incentives to the farming communities to really help lower the taxation on what groceries cost us today, because groceries are still one of those inflationary items that are out of control.
I have just a quick question before we get too deep into the conversation. For those coming late to the party, how is it that BC ended up with a separate carbon deal?
That was the option by the feds.
That was the option by the feds. Yeah, you could either go with their program, or if you already had one, you could be left alone. BC already had one. It was one of the first that put one in, and so we could be left alone on it.
And does it need to stay lockstep with the federal? Yeah.
It does to some extent. There are certain parameters that we have used. BC gets the least amount, and in estimates in the past 2 years, I've shown how BC actually pays the highest net carbon tax of any province across Canada. So it wasn't a surprise to us that our inflation rate was higher than every other province across Canada, 10 out of the last 15 months. And it's not a surprise that we pay the highest in fuel costs all in North America. We have the highest taxes.
And you've said that like it's kind of diverted now into general revenue. Is that the provincial one or the federal or both?
Provincial.
Yeah.
So the provincial one just goes right into general revenues. They say that they use it to incent different initiatives, but it's all just based on where they want to spend it.
Mm-hmm. How does something like the highway collapse or like erosion due to atmospheric rivers, where does that come from? Does it come from a carbon tax pool, or there's no kind of like
No, a lot of that money comes, like for the rebuild, comes from the federal government. Yeah. So there's special pools of money for emergency situations. So when we declare an emergency, that actually has us access funds from the federal government and from certain pools in the provincial government that are outside of any of this.
And have we seen is there a measurable reduction in carbon usage, or has there been any kind of impact
See, that's the kicker. And I'm going to bring it back to Jim's first question, which was, how do other countries do it when they don't have carbon tax? Now, of the top 10 lowest emitting countries in the world, so that's like your Norways and your Swedens and your Switzerlands, most of those have some form of carbon tax. But 7 out of 10 of those actually have a lower carbon tax than what BC and Canada has. So what we're finding over time, and there was a great paper that was written by a UBC researcher that showed when the carbon tax first came into being, it had an effect on emissions, but that effect has eroded. And as it's gone into generalized revenues and hasn't really been used to incent carbon emissions lowering, what we've seen are emissions going up. So since 2016 was the last year that we saw any lowering of the emissions other than 2020, which was obviously when COVID happened and the world stopped. So there was an expectation that we would see it. Now, however, BC's lowering was in less proportion to the rest of Canada. So why? We have the highest carbon tax with the least amount going back to our citizens, and yet we still can't lower our emissions on it. So it no longer has the effect that it was brought in to have, which is why we said if the federal government, because we have to follow a federal program, but if the federal government gets rid of it, we would get rid of it. Not quite as aggressive as other parties who are saying they would just axe the tax. Well, you can't actually until the federal government does. But if the federal government did, we would follow suit.
So you put out a newsletter here a couple days ago, and we published it on KelownaNow.
Yes, thank you.
One of the things that I'm not a fan of the carbon tax, but one of the things that I think sometimes both the right and the left, the conservatives and the liberals and the NDP they use EVs as a poster boy for and against. Like EV somehow is this either you're for climate change or you're against. They kind of use EV as the flag, and I think that they're missing the point because if you look at EVs. It's to Jason and I both drive EVs.
Okay, that's full disclosure.
Okay, but,
all right.
but I still have a gas car in our family, whereas Jim does not.
So I think like if you look at an S-curve adoption, like in your article here, you're talking more of a linear adoption, right? It's typically stuff that's better and cheaper ends up being an S-curve adoption. Like can you pull up an S-curve adoption? There's a chart there on S-curves. And the internet's S-curve, if you look at some of the things there, you'll see that the pickup is slow, the early adopters, and then, the internet, lots of different things, refrigerators and tend to. I mean, I'm of a firm belief that EVs, I'm driving one for about 9 months now, that they're better, they're cheaper. And I know that you wrote that they're luxury items. I think the difference is that some of the brands are like that right now because some of the automakers aren't ready. Like I think a lot of the especially the legacy automakers here in North America aren't ready, like Ford, GM, and Dodge. They're not ready, or Stellantis. Whereas Tesla has, I think, about 12 years now of doing what they do. The average selling price of a car, the Tesla is lower than the average selling price of a car right now in the States. So the average selling price of a Tesla is lower than what it is for the average selling price of a car in the U.S. Safest car in the world, it happens to be that car as well, a Tesla. There's so many different benefits to those cars. And I'm just going to go through a couple of things in here that I noticed that may, Canada as a whole has about a 5% adoption rate. Yeah. Which is, I think we're just edging out Hungary right now. Right? We're near the bottom when we look at the world stuff. Countries like Norway and that are going 8. We're talking about new car purchases, right? Not total fleet. Total fleet. BC's at 21%.
Correct.
Quebec is about to beat us, I think. Quebec is about to go above that. But the adoption, if you look at like S-curve adoption, you'll see a doubling kind of thing, right? So I think there's a survey that was just done out of the U.S. It said 60% of people buying a new vehicle are considering EV, right? So that adoption curve will pick up. But I don't think it needs carbon tax. I think it just needs people to be able to look at it and say, make a choice, right? Because I think over time, gasoline cars are more expensive to operate and maintain and all that kind of stuff.
With the carbon tax, I don't know if anybody can afford to buy an EV now.
Well, there's that.
Yeah. So, okay. So I keep going, and then I can.
Sure.
I can
then
comment.
you can
I'm trying to keep track of the things, but
And then you made a statement in there that you said that behemoths like Tesla are suffering financial losses.
Yeah. Last quarter.
No. They had made less money, but they still recorded income.
Yeah, posted a decrease in their
decrease in net income, but not a loss though. Like it's less than last time, but that was due to they did a retool in Shanghai because they launched a new brand, the Highland, right? So they shut down their factory for a bit, and plus they've dropped prices, right?
I was just about to say that
they did drop prices, but that was intentional too. Like if
they wanted to get through inventory.
In a way, but they need to blow up their Model 3s because they're bringing in new Model 3s. But also, if you watch Elon Musk's Master Plan 3, I don't know if you've watched it yet.
No, I have not.
It's a good thing to watch. It's a master plan on climate change. Like it just talks about how we solve the world's crisis. He says, I mean, this is him, fairly biased, saying that it's not, everybody wants to buy a Tesla. It's just that they can't afford one. So what his plan is to bring the prices down so that he wants to go to the people as opposed to the other way around. So this is a planned thing from him. This is not him doing it because he can't sell them. They're going to sell close to 2 million cars this year. The number one selling car in the world right now is the Model Y. That's the number one selling car. So Tesla, I don't think, is having those issues that Ford and GM are. Ford and GM have pushed back their plans to build plants and that. They had that UAW problem. And they're just having trouble selling some of the stuff that's on their lots too, right? They're having some issues with their Lightning and their Mach-E and stuff. And GM just really has not much to sell because they're discontinuing their Chevy Bolt or Volt now. I can't remember. They renamed it. I think it's the Bolt now.
Yeah, and Honda as well.
Honda
as well. Yeah, they've taken a step back from ZEVs, as we call them.
Yeah. Zero emission vehicles, right?
And not saying that they won't come back. I'm gonna talk about a little bit of a on a different front because you're going very specifically into the different manufacturers. I think what I was trying to say was that we're in a little bit of a more macro And if we look at it from a 30,000 foot level and the bills that have come in just recently, so last week, or week before, sorry, the NDP introduced an escalation or acceleration of the zero emission vehicle targets. So we've got zero emission targets for that are like 26 by 26, and then they go up from there. They've brought those down by 5 years each. Honda Canada wrote a letter saying that basically those emission accelerations were going to cost $500 million. That's not going to come from the company. That's not out of the goodness of Honda's heart. Are they going to like put forward $500 million so that British Columbians can drive? I'll use ZEVs, zero emission vehicles. That is going to come from those that are purchasing vehicles.
It's going to be added onto the price.
It's going to be
exactly.
That's where it's going to come from. So in terms of Elon Musk and being brilliant, absolutely, I would unequivocally agree. I think his open source in terms of all of his data and all of his patents and all of his absolutely brilliant way to do it, and his battery technology and all the different applications of it. Again, absolutely brilliant. I had the privilege of being down in Florida and witnessing one of the first Tesla walls in terms of battery storage, etc. But we need to deal with a big issue that we have in BC, and that is we do not have enough electricity.
Right.
And we will not be able to meet the electrification goals of the Clean BC plan in any way, shape, or form at the accelerated time frame.
See, this is what I keep asking. We have rolling blackouts due to power grid, instability or not enough being generated in California, arguably one of the, most advanced, parts of the world where they're moving ahead with electrical and they have opportunity to generate free electricity, and they're still struggling.
Absolutely. And that's been proven. Like, we've got white papers from the SFU CERG group, which is Clean Energy Research Group. We've got papers written by UBC researchers who have said we do not have enough electricity. And we kept bringing that forward. My colleague Tom Shapitka, who's the MLA from Kootenay East and the critic for energy mines and low carbon innovation, he and I have gone head to head on, does BC Hydro have enough? These papers are saying no. And the response was always, oh no, we do, until this April when they announced, so we don't have enough electricity, and now we would like other power providers to come forward.
So is that not assuming more of a linear progression though? Like saying like, oh, everything switches, because there's never going to be 100%. Even like in here, like there will never be 100% adoption because there's still people using flip phones, right? There's still people using a Nokia flip phone. There's people still riding horses. It will be more of a natural progression than it will be.
I don't think many people ride a horse to work. Just saying.
There are people.
Possibly, but not to work.
I do know people with flip phones.
Yeah.
But
I do too, but most of them, yeah.
Like for instance, we have 3 EVs at home, but we have solar on the roof. So we're not really tapping the grid. Do you know what I mean? Like we're putting into the grid. So there are other solutions, and we should be pushing for SMR technology and all that kind of stuff. And I know some of those things are a ways out there, but technology is really what's going to change things, right? Because I look at all the investments. Even British Petroleum BP did an investment last week. They bought $100 million worth of Tesla chargers, the first people ever to do a gas station to do it. So they're retrofitting some of their gas stations too. Yeah. So this is happening. The timeline, I think, is more what you're arguing than as opposed to that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Is that?
I would say the timeline, and that being an early adopter or being first in front for BC or British Columbia, and that's what we will be. We will be the basically the world leader in terms of our accelerated timeframes, is not where we need to be right now. And I mean, Jim, with all due respect, I'm just gonna talk about some of the privilege that you've just shared, right? You own a house, you have 3 EVs, and you have solar panels on your house. We have individuals within BC that can't even get an air conditioning unit installed in their apartment to stay alive.
But I traded one truck for almost 3 cars. Do you know what I mean? I traded a pickup truck for 3 cars because they are more economical than most people think. People think they're luxury items. They will save people money.
And anyone who works with a pickup truck,
right? That's people that work with a pickup truck,
which a lot of individuals do. It's our 100%. Number 1 industry is the construction industry.
But there's a lot of people that drive pickup trucks, like I was, just to drive a pickup truck.
At the end of the day,
go
have there been any projections on what it'll do for the price of electricity, like if we were to go at this pace?
So we haven't actually looked at the price of electricity, but we have looked at the price of infrastructure. So the BC Utilities Commission actually went to BC Hydro and went to Fortis and said, how much is the infrastructure upgrade going to cost, for us to meet our electrification goals? That Fortis produced a report back in February to the BCUC, so it's public information, and I can send it to you if you'd like, in which they said the city of Kelowna, not the Okanagan, not the interior, the city of Kelowna would cost $3.4 billion to upgrade to meet our electrification targets. So that's new car sales. So to your point, there is going to be, still some overlap. That's included in their projections. So if you do $3.4 billion on every resident, that's man, woman, child, you're looking at $28,333 per man, woman, child.
I'd love to see that report. Sure.
Absolutely, I can send it to you. So that's just for the city of Kelowna. Then never mind the infrastructure report that was released in 2021 that now is going to be accelerated because of these electrification goals. That actually is the electrification plans for all of the highways that is going to be necessary to, have someone in Dawson Creek driving an electric vehicle get all the way down into Kelowna. How does that actually happen? Or semis, how does that happen? This is just something that will take time, and you have to. That's why the 2050 goals, we're not even arguing those. It's not like,
well, then we're on the same page because, like I said, you're talking.
We need to slow it down,
and I think people will speed it up on their own. Do you know
Absolutely.
what I mean? But that's what my point is. People should have a choice, right? I don't think carbon tax should be pushed down their throats, and I don't think we should be hitting people over the head with a stick. People look at a smartphone and decide whether they want a flip phone or a smartphone, if they want an EV or if they want a gas car.
Absolutely.
Right? The market should decide. We shouldn't be having interference, and I don't think there needs to be incentives for EVs. I think the car will sell itself.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that I would still have bought the Tesla without an incentive.
Yeah. And for those that are now being forced, right? Because if we go to 100% EVs by 2030, if they are forced into it, the incentive might be the only reason that they get that EV, because they on par, EVs cost more than gas vehicles for the lower end. So you might say that the average of an EV is average of, Maseratis slash.
No.
But in general, to get that baseline, and to get into an EV, it costs more than.
I think with the credits in the U.S. right now, I think EVs are around $33,000, and I can show you some of that stuff too. Right?
But you just said with the credits, right? That's the incentives and the
right
subsidies.
Right now, people are making those choices based on the credits for sure, right?
They are.
But
And because they want to do something good for our environment, right? And in BC, we are privileged to have such a clean hydro system. So, I mean, we are so lucky.
How much angst was there around Site C Dam, though? Like when it was like, and now everybody's like, hey, this is fantastic.
Well, and we need, some of these reports are saying we don't just need Site C, but in order to meet our electrification goals, we need D, E, F, and G. And then we have to look at where we use our electricity, right? So if we incent everyone to get into electric vehicles, that is going to pull a demand off of the grid. Do we want that? Whereas light duty, which is the non-essential travel, is really not the largest emitter in BC, right? Our oil and gas sector is, our mining sector is. So would we not want our electricity to go to them, where they can electrify all of those different and get to net zero faster that way? Would that not be a better allocation of our
mining
electricity?
Companies are now doing, like when they're putting in autonomous EVs, like big trucks, they're doing it, right? On site.
Industry is definitely leading the way and trying desperately to get to those net zero targets. But that, I would argue, will take 3.4 megatons of CO2e out of the, out of our emissions, whereas light duty transportation will hardly be a drop in the bucket.
What are the chances we'll ever be able to tap any of our natural resources to go into battery making, the resources that go into making batteries to help fund some of this? And
if we want electrification, we need to get really comfortable with mining. We have to.
Well,
and
I would
we
say
have
comfortable with mining for everything, smartphones, everything. Like there is a big lithium deposit that's been discovered in Quebec. Quebec's friendly to mining compared to British Columbia.
Very much so.
Quebec has lots of hydroelectric as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and BC is comparing itself to California. You brought up California, Jason. And the one thing I will say about having lived in California for my growing up years, if you ride your beach cruiser from Newport Beach to Huntington Beach and look out across that beautiful ocean, dotted all the way along are oil rigs. You get to Huntington Beach Pier, and there's a beautiful oil refinery that's all painted blue with dolphins and orcas all over it. It is. They have been able to achieve some of their green because they have been built on the backbone of oil and gas. I mean, the Beverly Hills Hillbillies, where they have all the like oil rigs going, that's still there. Like you drive through Beverly Hills, those oil rigs are still going. So it's, the whole, I guess, ideation that we have of how amazing California is on all their green tech is oil and gas, is manufacturing, and is aerospace technology that we just simply do not have those types of economies.
Record year of production in the States for oil.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And they try to hide that as well. But
they don't, though. You know what? I went and saw Obama in Vancouver, and I was expecting all these green, questions, etc. And softball comes across, by the interviewer. So tell us about your green environmental policies and that you're most proud of in your 8 years or whatever. And he paused, and then he goes, "Now, don't get me wrong. We in the United States of America are unapologetically oil and gas producers. And in my time as president, we doubled our output." And I was like, he just went off on the oil and gas sector. And then I was like, yep.
So
and that's how they get green.
You talked about Elon Musk.
Yes.
And I did as well. He said, drill, baby, drill. Right?
Totally.
So my point on all of this is that we need to not use the EV as the poster, like as the thing that we're tugging back and forth, because I think there's misinformation on both sides on this EV thing, and I think people are trying to use it as a wedge, right? Do you know what I mean? To say like you got to get to EVs, and the other side is saying, well, EVs do all these things. We listened to a video this morning too from this Peter something. We were going to talk, and it was just full of misinformation, right? Like saying the EVs don't work in the cold. I drove mine in the cold. Yeah. I think we need to be honest. The legacy automakers are struggling for sure, because it's a lot of them are building regular cars with a battery pack. Do you know what I mean? Where Tesla's building a computer with wheels, right? Do you know what I mean? Like he has so much, but he has said he'll share the technology, and I think I believe Ford's going to make a deal, right? Because Ford was the first ones to do the superchargers, right? Yeah. The largest filling station network in the world now is Tesla. Yep. Like it's the largest filling station, and with BP saying they're going to spend $100 million. They did announce that last Friday. They said they're going to spend $1 billion in converting many of their stations. So that charging network will get built out, right?
Yeah, and I think that also EVs right now, because we count our emissions according to the Paris Accord, we count our emissions in the country of production, right, not the country of consumption. That our EVs, because we have such clean electricity, they are very low emission. But what we don't count is where they are actually created. What is the environmental footprint of those mines as to where that mining is done right now? And what is the environmental footprint of all of those different components that are done right now? And I haven't even touched on the human rights of all of the different areas that these are created in. But having said that,
even the energy that it takes to kind of like go through the process of distilling these elements.
Again, but and watch the master plan, because I'm going to tell you there's a lot of information in there that will ease your mind there, because they're creating their own lithium plant and that in the U.S. and talks about less reliance on minerals that are hard to find, right? The exotic minerals.
Like cobalt?
Yeah, the rare earth minerals.
Not cobalt, the rare earth minerals. No. There's a lot less dependence on that. So it is worth your 3 hours to understand. It's not a Tesla. It's not even about Tesla. It's about the future of the world, right?
And I do think that we will get there. Right, I know
we will get there.
Right, which is why I am a firm proponent of we need to keep the target there, but move through as innovation technology allows us to, and as the cost allows us to. Because right now people, I mean, just like carbon tax, people are having a difficult time making ends meet. And when you have a choice between rent or food,
Eating and eating.
yeah, you are not thinking about your EV.
Not to mention, like, it's kind of nice the higher side of society and life to be able to keep your kids in piano lessons and things like that, right? Like, I mean, these are maybe non-essentials, but geez, isn't the world just a lot better? And aren't these policies anti-human in some way?
Yeah.
I just have to.
So we don't want to get stuck
Totally, I
on
love
that, but you are right. The Scandinavian countries have huge adoption rates on EVs.
Yeah.
88% of all of it in Norway, the new EVs. I'm not saying that their whole fleet, right? So, and China is leading the way with total EVs, right?
Yeah.
China is.
But China makes their electricity with coal, so I won't.
Not all of it. But
Not
yes.
all of it, but so I don't really want to compare. But if you look at a Sweden who makes their electricity from garbage, now that is a cool story.
We got lots of garbage here.
We have so much, and that's where so from an environmental policy, I'd be focusing way more on zero waste technology, on figuring out how to use more biofuels or within our forestry and agricultural sectors to create electricity. There are so many opportunities, but we're not doing that right now. We're relying solely on our BC Hydro, which I think is folly, and we're going to run out, and that's why Fortis is saying it's going to be $3.4 billion for us to electrify Kelowna.
Is there a way to not have the EV as the kind of like the poster boy for it though? Because your article kind of goes against EVs, like it.
Oh no!
The adoption, just the timeline. I guess
timeline,
I should say, right?
Yeah, timeline.
But I think that, like I said, if there was no carbon tax, I think it should just be left to the markets to decide where it goes, right?
And it might be hydrogen, like right? It might not be electric. It might be hydrogen.
You and I could talk forever on hydrogen.
Yeah.
I invested in Ballard a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I think hydrogen is a useful thing for the heavy stuff like buses and super tankers and big items. I don't think it's really.
I just think we're in an energy transition, and I think a lot of the technology that we're talking about today won't necessarily be the technology that we have in 20 years.
I think the SMRs, because Canada's created the technology, we have the deposits in Saskatchewan. Like we should be, like they're going to open a plant in Ontario here right away, the SMR, but like those things will solve a lot of our baseload energy.
Are you seeing anything on the horizon? You're saying different technologies. Are there any out there on the horizon that haven't broken through or been approved or, like that you're aware of that might be in a place to replace some of this technology?
Well, I do think that hydrogen is catching up. I think that is one to watch. I think that there are other technologies that we haven't even considered yet. I do know that the SMRs are definitely something that other provinces and countries are considering. In fact, the IPCC report this last year said that without nuclear, we're not going to be able to actually
that's the base load,
actually
right?
solve our environmental.
You need something
aspects.
that has lots of base load, right?
Totally, and consistent. Yeah. Something that's very, very consistent.
Because solar is great, but it gets cloudy, it's not so great.
Totally.
Wind is great, but it's not windy, then it's not very good.
Yeah.
Like we don't get stuck here. We do have a couple other topics
sorry.
we want to hit to.
Keep going.
The next one is inflation, obviously
yeah.
fueled by carbon tax as part of it. Because we've heard from the Liberal government saying that it's I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, okay. Anyway, we'll go quick here.
Okay.
We're getting some messages from back there. So the Liberal government has said that the carbon tax really doesn't add to inflation, and they were saying that it's a point, whatever, 0.001. When Tiff Macklin came out and said, well, actually it does, right? So if we could get rid of the carbon tax, we would actually get down to our targets. We could ease pressures on on interest rates and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I mean the Parliamentary Budget Office, they actually were the first ones to talk about how much carbon tax contributed to our inflation rate. Tiff Macklem just confirmed that, Bank of Canada Governor General. So I do think that now we're having the same conversations. About 15% of our inflation right now is just carbon tax, and I would say it's disproportionate because some items like groceries would be way more of a contribution than what maybe
just common sense, right?
Oh,
Like,
totally.
I mean, like if energy is the main input in almost everything we do, like everything we eat, everything we do, and we live in the second largest landmass in the world, and we use trucks and trains to transport that stuff that burn diesel and tractors to plant our stuff. Like it makes sense that's going to increase our costs and continuing to escalate that makes no sense. I do believe Pierre Poilievre is kind of like got some momentum now with Atlantic Canada and with what's going on with what you guys are doing and what Alberta's saying and Saskatchewan's saying and Manitoba's saying, that there is some pressure now on the Liberal government to recognize that carbon tax is really hurting Canadians?
Yeah, I think that anyone who is who has an ear and is listening knows that people are hurting, and when people are hurting, things like the environment take way less of a priority. Not that it shouldn't be a priority, but when you don't hold the economy in the correct tension with the environment, in the correct stewardship tension, people are going to choose feeding and heating their families and heating their homes over, saving the world, because they're become very myopic in that survival moment.
They have to do the basics.
Well, it's the Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like there's a base,
exactly.
It's pretty predictable.
And so I think that as we've seen inflationary costs go up, and one of the best graphs, and I wish I'd known we could share graphs today. But one of the best graphs I saw was actually the cumulative effect of inflation over the course since 2020, and it's about 24%. So if you think about that, 24% less purchasing power. That's where people are feeling it. That's why they can't afford to any of the extras like piano lessons. I mean, I've got parents who have dual incomes who are saying, we can't afford our kids' extracurricular activities anymore. We can hardly afford, our childcare anymore. We're making decisions. I've got people who are threatening to go to Alberta. I used the story this last week in the House in question period where one of my constituents actually said, yeah, we're now known as the broken noggin. There are things like that where people are like, they're done. Retirements are being postponed. Suddenly middle wage incomes are not sufficient to just pay for the basic necessities.
Credit card debt's an all-time high.
Exactly.
And that's because people are using it to buy groceries.
Exactly. They're not just using it to buy the extras.
And at 28.8%, that's
Unreal.
a train wreck, right?
Train wreck.
Coming down the tracks. And it's so hurting so many people. And we are now seeing a lot of the mortgages that were at low rates are about to come due.
Yeah,
that's
2025.
The Bank of Canada is talking, maybe. I think there's a lot, because a lot of those mortgages are going to double.
Yeah, right? and it's going to be coupled with 2025 is when 60% of our mortgages start to renew. So that's a huge day of reckoning. But coupled that with now we're in a technical recession, which we all kind of feel, but now we know.
Oh, we're told it's not a recession.
Yeah, it's a technical recession, but maybe not a recession. Well, it is a recession. If you look at our GDP per capita, especially in BC, we are plummeting. Right. So that is a scary time.
The headlines I see is layoff, layoff, layoff.
Oh,
that's what
totally.
I see in all the big tech companies, right?
Yep.
So that flows down, right? It flows through.
100%.
And I, sometimes they play with a number that they say, oh, look at all the new jobs created. Yeah, because people have to take 2 jobs. Right?
Yeah, or the government is hiring like they are drunken sailors, which is scary.
How do we get out of this mess, I guess, is the question, right? So
you vote in a new government.
When is the election in BC?
So BC has one. Latest date is October 19th of 2024.
And then the
feds are the year following if the coalition agreement holds between the NDP and the Liberals.
What could we do to
speed that up?
Yeah. I mean, what's the wedge there? What do we got to...
I think that what we're seeing federally is people have just had enough, and I mean, it's going to be a difficult one. But if I was Jagmeet Singh right now, the leader of the NDP federally, I'd be really, really concerned about a coalition with a government that's basically plummeting and in free fall. And if you look at
maybe
what
he wants to become the official opposition.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly. As his numbers start to overtake where the Liberals are, I think you could see an opportunistic jump on that one. So I would say, just keep voicing concerns, because that's what's going to drive the next election.
Well, we won't take too much more time. I do thank you for coming in, even though it got a little hot sometimes, right?
Oh, I'm never afraid of that. I'm never afraid of that. Yeah.
We are doing a show called Energized as well.
Awesome.
But I do believe EVs will develop on their own. They don't need anybody to push them or drag people through the street making them to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to extract the resources that we have and spread that wealth amongst Canadians, right? And use the money from that to fund new technologies, right? Like our uranium sector is second to none. Our mining people are second to none.
Uranium, we're not allowed to mine uranium in BC, even though we have one of the largest uranium.
But some of our mining
in
people,
the valley next to
like,
us, right? Too.
Like some of the mining people in Canada are just amazing. I worked in mining too, and
it's phenomenal.
I've seen signs traveling through, like just north of Rock Creek up the Highway 33 about uranium. Are there deposits there that?
I'm not familiar with that one in particular, but there is one farther north that is one of the largest uranium veins in all of North America.
Midway had a lot of it too.
Okay,
So it's phenomenal, but I don't know. It's been about 40 years since we've been able to mine any.
To get any mining out of here is really to get a new mine.
It's 15 to 20 years for a mining permit.
It's really, Quebec is a lot more friendly and they get a lot more mines, and Quebec is really mining friendly.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it'd be great if, as a province, we could participate in the new economy that way. But anyways, I guess we're running out of time.
Yeah, a little bit. But if we get a new government in, you'll see a big mining push for sure. Indeed.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our discussion here today. I know we need to move on, and you do as well. But we want to thank you for coming in and taking some time to talk about this stuff. And remember, if you want to stay connected to us, just subscribe, like, and check out our YouTube and X channels. And, of course, our algorithm-free newsletter, which you can subscribe to at KelownaNow.com. Until our next live broadcast, we'll...